Her mother died, quietly, no headlines, no luxury funeral. Just a simple goodbye the world barely noticed. 3 weeks later, while the pain was still fresh, her husband handed her divorce papers. Not long after that, he married her best friend, the same woman who once held her hand and promised loyalty. They whispered that she was unlucky. They laughed, believing she was broken, and completely alone. What they didn't know was this: her mother hadn't been ordinary. She had been hiding a truth so powerful it could rewrite destinies. And the woman they abandoned in her darkest hour was about to inherit a secret worth billions. Backhand index pointing, right? If you believe karma never forgets an address, hit subscribe and like this video, because this story doesn't just prove it, it delivers it. The rain had been falling since morning, tapping softly against the hospital window like it was afraid to be heard. Inside the dim room, machines hummed in slow, tired rhythms. Each beep felt heavier than the last. She stood beside the bed, holding her mother's fragile hand, afraid that letting go, even for a second, would make this moment disappear forever. Her mother's breathing grew shallow. The room smelled of antiseptic and silence. No dramatic words, no grand farewell, just a tired woman who had lived quietly, far too quietly for what the world was about to learn. Her mother's eyes fluttered open one last time. She squeezed her daughter's hand with surprising strength and leaned in, barely able to speak. "Safety deposit box," she whispered. "Don't tell anyone." Before she could ask what it meant, before she could even process the words, the machines let out a long, flat sound. The nurse rushed in. Doctors followed, but it was already over. Her mother was gone. She felt numb, like the world had tilted off its axis and never settled back. In the corner of the room, her husband stood scrolling through his phone, his face blank. No tears, no comfort, just impatience hidden behind a polite silence. He asked practical questions about paperwork, about timing, but never once asked if she was okay. Her best friend, on the other hand, wrapped her in warm arms. She cried with her, whispered comforting words, promised she would never leave her side. "You're not alone," she kept saying, stroking her hair gently. But something felt off. That final whisper echoed in her mind. A safety deposit box? Why keep secrets now? Why the warning? As the rain grew heavier outside, unease settled deep in her chest. Her mother had always lived modestly. No luxury, no extravagance, just a simple life. So, why did her last words feel like the beginning of something much bigger? Something hidden, something dangerous, something no one else was supposed to know. The funeral day arrived wrapped in gray skies and heavy silence. Black umbrellas filled the cemetery like shadows without faces. She stood at the edge of her mother's grave, fingers trembling as the casket was lowered into the earth. Every sound felt distant, muffled, unreal, like she was watching her own life from behind glass. She waited for her husband to stand beside her. He didn't. He stayed near the back, checking his watch, answering phone calls, shifting his weight, like this was an obligation he wanted to escape. When people came to offer condolences, he nodded politely, but never once reached for her hand. Not when she swayed from exhaustion. Not when her knees nearly gave out. Her best friend, however, stayed close. Too close. She held her arm, whispered reassurances, wiped away tears that didn't belong to her. "You're being so strong," she said softly. "Your mom will be proud." But strength was the last thing she felt. After the burial, while mourners slowly drifted away, she finally turned to her husband. Her voice cracked. "Can we go home?" He sighed, like she had asked for too much. That was the moment she knew something was wrong. 3 weeks later, the house felt colder than ever. Her mother's clothes were still folded in a suitcase by the door, things she never got to unpack. She was sitting on the couch, staring at the wall, when he cleared his throat. "We need to talk," he said. Her heart sank. Conversations that started like that never ended well. "I'm not happy anymore," he continued, eyes fixed on the floor. "I've been feeling this way for a long time." She laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was unbelievable. "My mom just died," she whispered. "Can this wait?" He shook his head. "There's never a good time. The words felt like knives. He slid an envelope across the table. Divorce papers. Already prepared. Already signed. I need to find myself, he added as if rehearsed. I deserve happiness too. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The pain was so deep it went numb. She signed without reading, her hands moving on instinct like her body had taken over to protect her from the truth. He moved out that same week. The silence he left behind was louder than any argument they had ever had. Days passed in a blur. She barely ate, barely slept, and then one afternoon she went to a small coffee shop near her apartment, hoping the noise of strangers might drown out her thoughts. That's when she saw them. Her husband was sitting by the window, laughing, relaxed, alive in a way she hadn't seen in months. Across from him sat her best friend. Their hands were intertwined on the table. For a moment, the world stopped. She stood frozen, her coffee slipping from her fingers and splashing onto the floor. They looked up at the sound. Her husband's smile vanished. Her best friend's face turned pale. She walked toward them slowly, every step heavy. How long? She asked, her voice eerily calm. They exchanged glances. That was all the answer she needed. It just happened, her best friend stammered. We didn't mean for it to. Don't, she said quietly. People were staring now. She could feel their eyes burning into her skin. Humiliation wrapped around her like a second funeral dress. So, this is why, she whispered, looking at her husband. You couldn't even wait until my mother was buried. He shrugged. I didn't want to lie anymore. The betrayal was complete, not just from a man she married, but from the woman who knew her secrets, her fears, her grief. She walked out without another word. That night, alone in her apartment, she sat on the floor and hugged her knees. No tears came, just a hollow ache where her heart used to be. They thought they had taken everything from her. Her marriage, her trust, her dignity. What they didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that her mother's final whisper was still echoing in her mind. A safety deposit box, don't tell anyone. The bank vault smelled of cold metal and quiet authority. Thick walls, armed guards, a silence that pressed against her ears. She clutched the small key in her hand, the one she had found taped inside her mother's old recipe book, right where no one would ever look. Safety deposit box, don't tell anyone. Those words had followed her for weeks, haunting her in moments of stillness. Today, she was finally ready. The banker led her down a narrow corridor lined with steel doors. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if she were walking toward a truth that would change everything. He stopped, unlocked a box, and slid it onto the counter. Take your time, he said politely, then left her alone. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were neatly arranged documents, not stacks of cash, not jewelry, papers, folders, passports, USB drives, and on top, a handwritten letter in her mother's familiar, gentle script. She unfolded it slowly. My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are alone in the way only this world can make us feel. Her chest tightened. I'm sorry I never told you the truth. I wanted to protect you from a life where people love you for what you have, not who you are. She swallowed hard and continued reading. I did not live quietly because I was poor. I lived quietly because I was powerful. Her breath caught. The letter explained everything. Her mother had built and controlled a web of global companies, energy, logistics, pharmaceuticals, technology, registered under layers of legal structures across continents. Trusts upon trusts. Shell corporations shielding real ownership. Assets spread across private equity, land, patents, and sovereign bonds. The number at the bottom of the valuation page made her dizzy. Trillionaire. A secret one. Her knees nearly gave out as she lowered herself onto the chair. She reread the word again, convinced it must be a mistake. But the documents didn't lie. Neither did the notarized signatures. Neither did the names of international law firms she recognized from the news. Her mother hadn't just been wealthy. She had been one of the most powerful women in the world. Tears streamed down her face, not from greed, not from excitement, but from shock and awe. From the realization that the woman who packed her lunch in brown paper bags had quietly owned skyscrapers she had never seen, that the mother who wore the same coat for 10 years had signed deals that moved economies. Another page fell from the folder. A final note, written in bold, deliberate strokes. Money reveals who people really are. Her hands shook. I watched carefully. The letter continued. I saw who loved you when you had nothing. I saw who grew distant when I refused to live loudly. I saw who would betray you when they believed you were weak. Her mind flashed to the funeral, to her husband's cold eyes, to her best friend's false tears. Her mother had known. You are my only heir. Everything transfers to you today. But remember this. Wealth is not your power. Clarity is. The banker returned moments later with a professional smile, unaware that a sleeping giant had just awakened in his vault. As she closed the safety deposit box, her reflection stared back at her from the steel surface. She was no longer just a grieving widow, no longer a betrayed woman. She was the sole heir to a global empire. And for the first time since her mother's death, she stood up straight, not broken, not lost, but aware. They had mistaken her silence for weakness. She told no one, not a lawyer friend, not a distant relative, not even the banker who congratulated her with a careful smile. The wealth stayed invisible, just as her mother had taught her. She returned to her small apartment, brewed tea in the same chipped cup, and sat by the window watching the city move like nothing had changed. But everything had. Inside her, something had settled. The grief was still there. The betrayal still burned. But above it all now lived something calmer, sharper. Control. She didn't rush. Power, she learned quickly, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It waited. Her first move wasn't revenge. It was observation. Through private investigators and consulting firms that never spoke names, she learned everything. About her ex-husband's company, the struggling mid-sized logistics firm he had always exaggerated at dinner parties. About the loans he hid from her. About the investors who were losing patience. She learned about her former best friend's hotel chain, too, the glossy social media posts, the smiling interviews, the illusion of success masking poor management, unpaid vendors, and inflated projections. They looked successful. They weren't. And that was the difference between noise and substance. Weeks later, a private equity firm quietly entered negotiations with her ex-husband's company. No press, no announcements. Just numbers and contracts. The offer was generous, too generous to refuse. He celebrated the acquisition with champagne and posted about it online, calling it the breakthrough of a lifetime. He never asked who was behind it. Why would he? People like him never imagine power that doesn't look like them. Within months, she owned a controlling stake through layered trusts, offshore entities, and a board that answered to names he would never hear. Then came the audits. Not personal, not emotional, just professional. Performance reviews, financial reviews, leadership assessments. Her ex-husband failed every one of them. Missed deadlines, poor decision-making, inflated self-reports, a pattern of blaming subordinates while taking credit for their work. The board noted everything. He was called into meetings that felt different now, shorter, colder, less forgiving. Bonuses were frozen. Authority was reduced. His vision was questioned. For the first time in his life, his charm didn't work. He went home angry, confused, blaming everyone but himself. She never watched. She didn't need to. At the same time, another firm began acquiring quiet stakes in a luxury hotel chain, one known for appearances more than results. Her former best friend stood proudly at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, smiling for cameras, unaware that her empire was being measured from the inside out. Mystery guests began arriving at the hotels. They asked specific questions. They noticed things others overlooked. Accounting discrepancies, staff turnover, vendor complaints buried under marketing gloss. Then came the audits, compliance issues, operational failures, management negligence. Her best friend laughed at first. Just corporate nonsense, she said in interviews, until investors started pulling out, until lenders asked questions she couldn't answer, until her name once celebrated, became associated with mismanagement. There were no scandals, no public accusations, no dramatic exposes, just quiet consequences. Executives resigned, partnerships dissolved, stock value slipped week after week. The hotel chain didn't collapse overnight. It withered. Her former best friend stood helpless as boardrooms went silent and invitations stopped coming. She blamed bad luck. She blamed the market. She blamed everyone except the woman she had betrayed, because the truth never even crossed her mind, and that was the most powerful part. She didn't take their lives apart. She simply stopped holding them together. Months passed. Her ex-husband lost his position by mutual agreement. The press release praised his contributions while quietly removing his authority. The man who once said, "I deserve happiness too," now stood in unemployment lines pretending it was temporary. Her former best friend sold her remaining shares at a loss, smiling through interviews about new beginnings while privately begging investors to return her calls. Still, she said nothing. No confrontations, no speeches, no satisfaction posts. She visited her mother's grave one morning, dressed simply, placing fresh flowers in the soil. "I understand now," she whispered. Justice didn't have to scream. It didn't have to humiliate. It didn't even have to be seen. Real power corrected imbalance and walked away. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a secure message confirming another successful transition of assets. Another system stabilized, another future secured. She was no longer reacting. She was designing. They had mistaken her silence for weakness. They had mistaken her grief for stupidity. They had mistaken kindness for blindness. But she had learned the final lesson her mother left behind. Revenge is loud. Justice is quiet. And intelligence changes outcomes forever. The first headline appeared early on a Monday morning. A new global scholarship fund launches, backed by one of the world's most powerful private estates. No name at first, just numbers. Billions committed to education, women-led innovation, and medical research in underserved regions. Universities across continents confirmed the grants. Foundations scrambled to learn more. Social media buzzed with one question: who is behind it? By noon, the answer surfaced. Her name, the same woman most people remembered only as the quiet one, the widow whose husband left her after her mother's death. The story unraveled fast. Financial journalists traced the trusts. Analysts connected the companies. The truth hit the world like a delayed thunderclap. She wasn't just wealthy. She was one of the most powerful private individuals alive. Cameras flooded the entrance of the charity gala that evening, the first public event she agreed to attend. The venue shimmered with crystal lights and soft music. She arrived calmly, dressed with understated elegance, no bodyguards in sight. And that's when they saw her. Her ex-husband froze mid-conversation. The color drained from his face. Whispers rippled through the room as recognition spread. Phones lifted. Eyes followed. Her former best friend stood near the bar, clutching a glass too tightly, suddenly aware that every bridge she burned had led to this moment. On stage, the host welcomed the audience and announced the fund officially, naming her as founder and sole benefactor. Applause erupted. Standing ovations followed. She stepped forward. The microphone felt light in her hand. "I didn't build this because I was angry," she began, her voice steady. "I built it because I was awake." The room fell silent. "I learned something after losing everything I thought defined me," she continued. "Sometimes hurt people don't break, they build." Her eyes met theirs, not with rage, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. "I hope this fund reminds us that integrity outlives betrayal." That was all. No accusations, no names, no revenge. But the truth was louder than any insult. By the end of the night, investigative pieces were everywhere. The acquisitions, the audits, the leadership failures, her ex-husband's mutual departure, her former best friend's collapsing empire. Karma hadn't shouted. It had documented. They lost contracts, networks, influence, not because she exposed them, But because they were never as strong as they pretended to be, as the gala ended, she slipped out quietly, untouched by the chaos behind her. Outside, the city lights reflected in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt complete, not victorious over them, but free from them. She didn't destroy them. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply became the woman they never deserved. Her mother's legacy didn't live in skyscrapers or numbers on a balance sheet. It lived in lives changed, in classrooms filled with hope, in young minds given chances that once felt impossible. Every scholarship carried the quiet strength of a woman who believed power should protect, not punish. The world would remember the money, but those who truly understood would remember the restraint. She proved that the strongest people don't waste their energy on revenge. They rise so high karma does the rest. And somewhere in the silence between success and peace, her mother's final lesson echoed, fulfilled at last. Backhand index pointing right. Now tell us, what would you have done in her place? Would you forgive or let karma speak? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories that prove one truth. Quiet strength always wins.